Hey, I'm Rebekah Reysen. Good to see you all. Thanks for joining us here for another episode of the Chit Chat. Today we have a special guest named Dr. Richard Balkin. Let me tell you more about him. Dr. Richard Balkin is a professor in the Department of Leadership and Counselor Education and coordinator for education research and design in the School of Education at the University of Mississippi. Dr. Balkin is a fellow of the American Counseling Association, past editor for the Journal of Counseling and Development, the flagship journal for the American Counseling Association, and past president for the Association for Assessment and Research in Counseling. He is also the author of Practicing Forgiveness, A Path Toward Healing, which we'll talk to him about today. Dr. Balkin began practice as a professional counselor in 1993 and has worked in academia since 2003. His publications include textbooks on assessment and counseling, research, and the counseling relationship, published tests and technical manuals, peer-reviewed manuscripts, book chapters, and conference proceedings. His counseling experience with at-risk youth was formative to his research agenda, which includes understanding the role of counseling and relevant goals for adolescents in crisis and counseling outcomes. He has published in the area of religious diversity and forgiveness and developed a model and measure for counseling clients. Welcome to the show. Good to see you again, Dr. Balkin.
Great to be here. Thanks.
Sure. And we had another episode with you a couple of months ago that was already aired. So we are really excited to talk to you about this second part, and very impressive to be writing a book. So we're looking forward to hearing more about it. So let's just start off with what prompted you to write a book? What made you want to specifically write a book on forgiveness? That's a pretty big topic.
Yeah, it's funny. I started my whole kind of research agenda in the areas of adolescents who are in crisis, who are a danger to self, danger to others. That was really my passion. And I thought I was doing some innovative research in that area. I mean, I've been recognized for this. I've got the American Counseling Association Extended Research Award for this area, for this particular area. And I'd go to national conferences and I'd present, and I'd be really excited to be presenting on this. And I'd have like 6 people show up. And so it's like, I always thought, adolescents who are danger to self, danger to others, people want to know about this. But my audience was very small. And not to say that that's good or bad, that was just the nature of it. On one occasion, I deviated from this, and it was based on a clinical experience I had, which I can talk about in a little bit, but it got me thinking about this area of forgiveness, and I developed this kind of conceptual framework about forgiveness, and wrote a conceptual manuscript. It wasn't data driven. It was just based on ideas that were out there. And it was centered on this idea of mechila, which is a Hebrew word, which means to wipe away debt. And I presented on this, and the room was packed, like 120 people in the room and people standing up in the back. And I'm like, this really matters to people. And when you find something, at least when I find something that is really important to people, I'm like, well, then I need to understand this more, and I need to do more with this because people want to hear about this. And so, this was just, how this tied into adolescence actually is a story. And it's a story that's around 1998. I meet a client while I'm working in a psychiatric hospital on an adolescent unit. And I call her Sheila in the book. And Sheila was sexually abused by her father. And she tells her school counselor, and the school counselor does what the school counselor is supposed to do. It's a mandated reporter. The school counselor makes a report to the abuse hotline. There's an investigation. CPS, Child Protective Services, gets involved. The father's removed from the home. And the daughter becomes suicidal because the mom isn't providing much support for her daughter. And she expresses a desire to hurt herself. The CPS worker brings her to the hospital. She's evaluated, she's admitted. And, kind of the underlying issue of this is that dad's denying the report. He's denying the allegations made by Sheila. And after about 48 hours, I'm doing the first family session with Sheila and her mom. And if you can imagine a family conference room in a hospital, there's a sofa, there's some chairs, and usually the parent and the child will sit on the sofa together. Well, that doesn't happen. Sheila walks in the room. She's 16 years old. She sits on the sofa. Mom sits in the chair next to mine. And the first words out of Mom's mouth was, as a Christian, you have to forgive them. And I look at the mom and I'm like, wouldn't that be convenient for you? I didn't even think about what I was saying. I mean, I just said it, Sheila needs an advocate. I'm her advocate. I'm on her side. I'm here to protect her. And I didn't see Mom doing that. Now, I could have said something to Mom, must be really difficult for you to have to choose between your daughter's disclosure and your husband's denial. But I didn't do that. I just went straight for the jugular and said, wouldn't that be convenient for you? Then you don't have to choose between your daughter's disclosure and your husband's denial. You can just sweep it all under the rug because it's all forgiven. And so that family session doesn't go so well. And I even had people give me feedback on that. They're like, I don't like what you said. It's like, I don't care. I'm not changing the narrative of the story because you don't like it. That's what happened. Like it or not, right or wrong, that was what I said, and, there's counsel and critique in that. Whatever you say, that's what it boils down to. And so I ended up going to court and testifying about this case. And, family's really thrown into a hornet's nest. She ends up going to live with other family because she doesn't have her mom's support. Dad goes to jail. And things really do get worse before they get better. But at least one thing that we know is that Sheila's going to be safe. She's going to be in a caring environment. She's going to be supported, and that's the outcome that Sheila's going to need to be healthy. So you can see this kind of convergence between my work in adolescent counseling and this issue of forgiveness. All I can tell you is this case sticks with me for 5 years. And 5 years later, 2003, I moved to McKinney, Texas. I'm taking my family to Yom Kippur services, the Day of Atonement. There's a study group in between the morning service and the afternoon service. I'm fasting, so I don't want to go home and stare at the refrigerator. And in the study group, I learn about the Jewish conceptualization of forgiveness, which falls into 3 categories. One is kapara, which is forgiveness that only God can give. Silicha, which is restitutional forgiveness. I borrow your lawnmower, I break your lawnmower, I repair your lawnmower. We're good. And then mechila, which is to wipe away debt. And really, you're wiping away the debt because the debt cannot be repaid. Maybe somebody has borrowed money from you and they just never paid it back and they're not going to pay it back. And maybe they can't pay it back. And so you go, you know what? It's fine. I moved on. But there's other types of debt that can't be repaid back, like slander, neglect, and abuse. And it resonated with me. It's like, that's it. That's what we don't talk about in forgiveness. We don't talk about this idea that forgiveness isn't always this renegotiated, reconciled relationship. Sometimes it's what I want from you, I'm never going to get. So I don't believe I'm going to get it anymore. I'm not going to expect anything from you. And we're done. How empowering. How empowering for the victim to know that I don't have to reconcile with this person. I don't have to say, oh, I forgive you and bring you back into my life. I don't have to do that. I can have forgiveness not through an interpersonal lens, but but through an intrapersonal journey of, I'm done dealing with this, and I'm really done with you, and I don't hold any ill will against you, and I don't expect anything from you. There's that sigh of relief.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought that was really empowering. And I wanted to take that concept and write about it. And then I presented on it, and it resonated with folks. And so then I'm like, well, now I've got this model. Can it be measured? And I started doing research with it. And I developed an instrument and this line of research with forgiveness. And, most people aren't going to pick up an academic article. But I thought I had something to say. I thought I had a story to tell. I thought I had something much more meaningful to communicate in terms of not just delivering information in an academic way, but something that might resonate with people. Because I think people wanted this, and that's why I wrote a book. Long story short.
Well, we've definitely enjoyed reading it, and there's so much to it. It's such a, forgiveness is such a deeply personal thing from person to person, and it's such an important topic. And you mentioned also reconciliation. We've talked about kind of the definition of forgiveness, but what would you say is kind of the definition of reconciliation?
Yeah, I define that as a renegotiation of the relationship. It doesn't mean that you're going to go back to the way things were, but it does mean you're going to go back.
Mm-hmm.
So things might be different. Things might even be better. I talk about couples counseling, and couples that stay together and never experience any problems, there's no transgressions, those are great couples. Those are really strong couples. But you know what? Couples that go through stuff and repair their relationship, those are strong couples too. Those are worthy of our respect as well. And, those are two very different journeys, but two very different types of strength that are displayed. The ability to repair and rebuild relationships should not be discounted. It should not be seen as a weakness. And so, that's why I call it a renegotiation of the relationship. Because, it might be going back to the way things were, or it might just be going back to something that's different, but still strong and meaningful.
Kind of like a new normal, establishing a new normal in some sense.
In this COVID pandemic, I don't want to use that term. I hope we don't have a new normal. I want to teach classes face-to-face again. I want to see my students. I hope, a year from now, all my classes aren't over Zoom. I don't want that to be the new normal. So we got to be careful.
True.
Yeah, it could be a new normal.
Well, and since it is kind of a complex process with forgiveness, I'm sure there's people where you talk about couples, it's complicated. There's some ups and downs, but in terms of just kind of forgiveness in general, and you've developed a model for it, which is pretty exciting. Way to kind of quantify, the forgiveness process, or just tell us more about this and what that means to have a forgiveness model.
Sure. Well, first of all, this is not the first forgiveness model. As a matter of fact, in the book, I compared this model to two other prominent models that by Everett Worthington and by Robert Enright. If you're going to read about forgiveness, you're going to read from Enright and Worthington. They've both done international work in the area of forgiveness. Just as an aside, Everett Worthington wrote a blurb on the back of the book. And when I saw that, I was just total fanboy. I was like, oh my God, Everett freaking Worthington. And, it was just a moment for me of like, I've been citing this guy for years. And one of my doctoral students who did her dissertation, I immediately shared this with her because she was like, are you kidding me? And then I put it on Facebook and I got counselor educators going, oh yes, he's such a great guy. And I was at a banquet and did ballroom dancing with Everett Worthington. I'm like, who is this guy? He is like, you know, he's truly this Renaissance man. Anyway, so I emailed him and, didn't expect a response back, and I got a response back of, "You're welcome," and I was like, "Oh, yay." So, but yeah, so there's other forgiveness models out there, and I compare my model to these two other prominent models because I think that's important to look at how this model is different. And I think, not necessarily better, but different. And I think a key difference is in the brevity of it. I have 4 steps, not 20. You can memorize it. So, put on a multiple choice quiz. It's good. But the other part of it is that there's a stronger focus on the intrapersonal process. And what I mean by that is all, forgiveness models are always focused on how do we deal with the person who has caused offense, and that is interpersonal forgiveness. All right. But what if you don't want to deal with that person? And so I spend just as much time talking about that aspect of that intrapersonal aspect of what if you don't want to reconcile, but you don't want to carry this burden with you? That's the key. And so that's a key difference. And so that's one aspect of this model that I think is really important. I focus also on being a counselor, the nature of collaboration, of telling your story. There's a lot of stories in this book. We learn by storytelling. One of my colleagues and somebody who I've written with in the past, Jeffrey Kotler, another person I can fanboy over, but Jeffrey has a book about the importance of stories. You don't read a research book and get tears in your eyes unless you're going to have a test on it. Then you might cry a little bit. But you'll go and watch a movie and have an emotive experience. I just finished watching The Queen's Gambit. There's a scene in the show where she gets a hug from an adversary, and it's just a poignant moment that I'm watching this. But it's a poignant cultural moment. It's a poignant moment of victory, and I think that stories help elicit emotion and a thoughtful response in a relationship. And so I encourage people when they're dealing with issues of conflict to share their story with someone. And it doesn't have to be a counselor. So that's a good thing if you do that, but it doesn't have to be. I like to normalize the counseling process. We all can benefit from help from time to time. It doesn't require a mental illness. But it can be with a mentor. It can be with a friend. It can be with grandma. Look, our feelings become more manageable when they become more mentionable. And if you've ever had an experience where something so severe has happened that you can't even talk about it, until you do, that moment, it goes from a 10 of unmanageable to a 9. I can now talk about it. And sometimes it's just the passage of time that's occurred. Sometimes it's just a feeling of safety. Sometimes it's just the notion of, I think I can deal with this now. But whatever it is, I do believe in this relationship between management and mentioning. That the more I mention something, the more I can manage it. I speak it out in the universe. It becomes real. And that's the nature of this collaborative exploration, which is the first step of the model, is to identify and talk about what's going on with you. And then the second part is to think about the role of reconciliation. Reconciliation isn't always beneficial. I've worked with women in domestic abuse shelters. Reconciliation is not always beneficial.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it is. Sometimes you want this person to express remorse and change, and you want to fix what is broken. And that's great. That can be done. And so sometimes reconciliation is beneficial. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes we have a conflict because our belief in reconciliation is tied to forgiveness. In the book, I talk about the Dylan Roof hearing. Recall that Dylan Roof murders 9 people in South Carolina, and at an African-American church. And he's at a hearing, being videoed in, and family members who have lost someone that Dylan Roof murdered, they are there and they are saying, "I forgive you and may God have mercy on your soul." There was one instance that I heard in the video, and you can watch the video on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
One of the individuals says, "I forgive you because I have to forgive you, and may God have mercy on your soul." And so you just think about this cultural mandate of forgiveness and how that might conflict with where you're really at. And I talk about decisional forgiveness as, I'm forgiving you because I made the decision to forgive you, but emotionally I'm not there.
Mm-hmm.
And what can happen in that process. And so being open to this idea that forgiveness doesn't have to be interpersonal, it can be intrapersonal. So if you believe that forgiveness is a mandate, being willing to consider that forgiveness may be a mandate in my culture, maybe not, but maybe you might believe that. But reconciliation is not necessarily a part of forgiveness. It is a separate aspect of it. And you can deal with the idea of, do I want to wake up every morning wishing somebody ill will and being angry? Most people would answer no to that. All right. So being able to release that aspect would be a form of intrapersonal forgiveness, but not necessarily a reconciliation. And that's okay. And so being open to this alternative idea of what forgiveness might mean, because I think automatically we always go to forgiveness means a reconciled relationship. We don't always say that, but that's what we think about. We think about, all the stories that go on with forgiveness. Maybe you remember this, one of the oldest stories, Jacob and Esau, and they don't get along, they fight. Jacob steals Esau's birthright. He steals the blessing from his, from the father. This is not a good thing. And yet we see the story of Jacob and Esau encountering each other and giving each other a hug. Need something a little more recent, maybe Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker.
That's a classic. Yep.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Darth Vader's a pretty bad dude. He destroys a planet. He kills baby Jedi. He is not a good person.
Right.
But at the end, he takes his mask off. He looks at Luke with his own eyes. Spoiler alert. Sorry. And, and he gets to become a Force ghost. He's right there with Obi-Wan and Yoda. And dancing Ewoks. if you're kind of into that thing. Um, so, you know, but you got to go, wait a minute. We even that was forgiven,
Mm-hmm.
So, but we see, that's where we often go. We often don't think about Voldemort. Another spoiler alert. He's a bad dude. He kills Harry's parents. You know what? He continues to be a bad dude.
Mm-hmm.
The whole movie, he's a bad dude. And when he dies as a bad dude. And what Harry wants is to be reunited with his parents, and never gets that, of course, because are dead, and they remain dead. But what if the story would have ended and Harry never got over the evil of Voldemort, and for the rest of his life was angry at what had transpired and never getting to know his parents and growing up in an abusive home with the Dursleys? Well, no, that's not how the story goes.
Mm-hmm.
All right. The story goes where Harry overcomes the loss of his parents, the abusive home environment, and finds his real family, at his school, with his mentors and teachers and counselors, and friends, So, but not with, but he doesn't enjoy the traditional family.
Mm-hmm.
He has to create his own. So it's a very different type of story, and it's but does Harry work through a process of forgiveness? It doesn't seem like he wakes up feeling ill will every day. It doesn't seem like that would be congruent with his character. And so I would say, yeah, that probably does occur, even if J.K. Rowling doesn't talk about it much.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, in terms of forgiveness, there's probably a lot of benefits to it. Just not harboring negative feelings anymore, or what you talked about before. But what would you say are some benefits to it? And they're probably also, or are there some benefits to not forgiving people?
I think anger gets a bad rap. We often, talk about anger as this negative emotion. Anger's not a negative emotion. Anger can be very empowering. I can get some things accomplished when I'm angry. What anger is, though, in my opinion, is a secondary emotion to fear. When I see somebody who is angry, I often ask, what are you afraid of? People don't want to talk about fears. They want to talk about anger, but what are you afraid of? When you're angry at your kid, for example, what are you afraid of? I'm afraid of my kid doing something stupid. I'm afraid of my kid getting hurt. I'm afraid of my kid not being successful. And then if I don't get on to my kid, and if I don't nag on my kid, and if I don't discipline my kid, I'm afraid that my kid will be undisciplined, irresponsible, and complacent. Okay, those are regular, legitimate fears. Ever been angry with a teacher? Why do you get angry with a teacher? Usually it's because you're afraid you're going to fail.
Mm-hmm.
The teacher's unfair, the teacher's unkind, I don't understand this teacher, you're not doing well in the class. How often does someone go, I really don't like this teacher, and I think this teacher's really unfair. How you doing in the class? Oh, I'm making an A. You don't hear that very often.
Exactly.
So, a fear, it brings about this fear of failure. And so I think that, is fear legitimate? Yeah, I think it is. And I think understanding fear and conquering fear can be a really important developmental task, whether in childhood all the way through adulthood. We are constantly trying to conquer fear, whether those fears are existential, I'm afraid of getting sick, I'm afraid I'm going to die, I'm afraid of getting hurt, or whether those fears are very real. I'm afraid of dealing with this person. I'm afraid of going back into this relationship. And, being afraid of going back into a relationship might be very appropriate. All right. And so then let's not go back into that relationship. Let's listen to that fear. And that's not a negative. But if that fear is coming across as anger, and we can get past that anger and understand it, you're really angry with this person. Why? Because I don't want them to hurt me again. There's the fear. It's not I'm afraid of being irreparable. No, you're afraid of getting hurt again. You're afraid of putting your trust into something that's not likely to be reciprocated. And so it doesn't have to be this petrified fear. It might just be this protective type fear. So, people who are defensive, those defense mechanisms are there for a reason. We should listen to those and be careful about breaking those down, because when we break those down, we do become more vulnerable.
Yeah, and you talked about forgiveness with culture and faith, and we talked about your own faith as well. How do those three work together or work against each other when something comes into play where, like you were talking about with Sheila, her mother, and then with the church, with people saying, I have to forgive you or I will forgive you? It's a complex structure.
Yeah.
So how does it work together or work against each other in forgiveness?
So let's understand a couple things. So let's just take that moment I talk about where Sheila's mom says to Sheila, as a Christian, you have to forgive him. All right. In my mind, I'm thinking, wow, that's really manipulative. Okay.
Yeah.
I am not looking at that as a sincere expression of religious faith, and I'm concerned about your salvation.
Right.
No. Sheila's mom is concerned about her picture of what her family looks like and what's actually happened. All right.
Yeah.
So, however, let's just look at the comment at face value. As a Christian, you have to forgive him. Is that true? We've heard the old adages of, turn the other cheek. That's a very common anecdote. And, honestly, I don't know whether that's true or not. I'm not Christian, I'm Jewish. But I'm open to exploring the idea here. And, what I tend to think is that there are so many interpretations of our faith. And we tend to use those interpretations based on what feels convenient. If as a Christian I have to forgive this person and reconcile this relationship, then I don't have to change. I don't have to go through something that seems initially really uncomfortable. I don't have to reconcile this perceived mandate of my faith with what's really happening. So these conflicts can be very real. And that's where I really hone in on that second phase of the role of reconciliation. Are you open to different interpretations of forgiveness? Because really, as a Christian, you have to forgive him, really centers on forgiveness is a relational, interpersonal process. It's not considering forgiveness as an intrapersonal journey. Mechila, wipe away the debt and go it alone. What I want from you, I'm never going to get, but I'm not going to wish any ill will upon you. And we're done. And so that to me is where we can work to resolve conflict between culture and religion and the natural events that are occurring in our lives, of understanding that forgiveness might have a broader context than just this interpersonal sphere.
Mhm. Yeah. So, what advice do you have for someone who wants to forgive a person who has harmed them, but they don't know how to?
Yeah. So, remember in Star Wars that in order for Luke to become a Jedi, he had to confront Vader? Yoda says, he says, Yoda's dying. He says, I'm a Jedi. And Yoda's like, no, not yet. What do I have to do? You got to confront Vader. And remember in the Harry Potter books, um, only Harry has to deal with Voldemort. Nobody else can do it because they're bonded in some way. It's got to be Harry. We see this play out in so many what Carl Jung called archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
These stories that we hear repeatedly over and over again. And so your listeners are probably going, what kind of nerd did they bring in on ChitChat? And others are going, is it going to talk about Star Trek? Earth did have to confront Khan, by the way. So we see that happening. So, for you nerds out there, that one's for you. Okay.
Yep. Totally acknowledge that nerd reference there. Yep.
Mm-hmm. All right. So yeah. So we got Harry Potter, Star Wars, and Star Trek. We're good, right?
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
A lot of bases. Yeah, that's creative. I like that.
All right. So anyway, you're gonna have to you have to confront Vader,
Mm-hmm.
and we're gonna have to see if by having this conversation with the offender, assessing the extent to which the offender has remorse and is changing. The person who's been hurt, the victim in this case, has control over what they think about, the person who harmed them, what they believe to be a healthy outcome, whether the role of reconciliation is beneficial or not. And they have some control on the path moving forward. But what they don't have control over is the other person.
Mm-hmm.
And as we know, some people who are hurtful continue to be hurtful.
Right.
And in that case, even if you think remorse or even if you think reconciliation is beneficial, if the person hasn't changed, you're going to have to realize that reconciliation won't be beneficial. It'll be unhealthy. It'll put you right back into mechila, that intrapersonal process. If the person is remorseful and has changed, well, then you can move towards an interpersonal renegotiation of the relationship. And because all the elements are there, positivity towards the person, a belief that reconciliation is beneficial, the notion that the person seems to have remorse and is wanting to change behavior. You can renegotiate a relationship like that. I call that the everything is awesome, outcome.
Mm-hmm.
But not all outcomes are that way. Sometimes this process is more conflicted. And we have to be aware of when you still have negative feelings towards this person, or you believe the role of reconciliation is not beneficial, but you're going to try and reconcile this relationship anyway.
Mm-hmm.
That can be really unhealthy. You probably know people who seem to gravitate towards toxic relationships. And that can be tough. Because you're trying to renegotiate a relationship that is inherently unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and in terms of forgiveness, sometimes when people seek that, that's one thing, but those who maybe have regretted something they've done, what kind of advice do you have for people who are maybe seeking forgiveness?
Yeah. So I touch a little bit on in the book on self-forgiveness. And, admittedly, that's not my focus.
Mhm.
But the opposite is true in self-forgiveness. In self-forgiveness, you're responsible for your remorse and change. And on the positive note, that is one of the most predictive aspects of the outcome. That in the research I've done and the data collected, remorse and change is the strongest mediator of whether or not a relationship will be reconciled or not. Role of reconciliation is also important, but not as important as the remorse and change of the offender. So, when you've hurt someone and you've expressed remorse and you've changed, and you're wanting to reconcile that relationship, you've basically put together a stronger likelihood of that happening. But sometimes it still doesn't. And you have to recognize then that what you wanted from that relationship isn't going to happen. And be willing to forgive yourself in spite of the fact that this relationship is not going to be renegotiated. All right. And you have to let this person, go. Not every harm can be healed. Yeah.
We're in the holiday season now, so we just had Thanksgiving. Christmas is coming up.
Yeah.
New Year's. It's time where people start making their goals or expectations for the new year, and forgiveness may be one of them, since a lot of families get together at this time.
Yeah.
So where can we get your book?
Oh, wow. So it's December 1. It's out. It's on Amazon.
Right.
Yeah.
Yay, great.
But you want a signed copy and you want to support your local bookstore, order from Square Books here in Oxford, Mississippi. They're carrying the book. I've been there the last 2 weeks signing copies, and it's really kind of cool. Square Books is a really neat independent bookstore. It has a very unique history. You've had famous authors such as John Grisham, who's a graduate of the University of Mississippi School of Law. He debuts his books at Square Books. Toni Morrison has been there. Alice Walker, Allen Ginsberg. So a lot of famous authors have been at Square Books. So another nerd moment for me is just being able to be at Square Books, see my book at Square Books, sign my book at Square Books. It's just been really cool. It's in Wikipedia. You can read about Square Books. It's one of the most outstanding booksellers in the country, as noted by Publishers Weekly. And the owner has been noted as Richard, and the last name is escaping me at the moment. He's a former mayor of Oxford. Holworth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Has been noted as one of the outstanding booksellers in the country. So anyway, so kind of a cool history there, but you can get it from Square Books. You can get it from Oxford University Press. You can get it from Amazon.
Well, we will definitely make sure that the links to your book are in the description down below this video.
Well, thank you. So that's really neat. Appreciate it.
Yeah, congratulations. That's a huge accomplishment and such an important topic. I mean, that's something that everybody experiences in some way, shape, or form throughout their lives. So it's a big deal.
It's neat that people in my circle who know me, they kind of know me as a stats nerd or a research geek, and they're looking at this and they're going, the stats guy wrote this? I told them, I'm like, the stats guy as a character, this is really me. This is really who I am. And, if you want to understand me and understand what I'm about, you know, this is a good way to do that. But it's also been cool because, everybody has this journey, this connection to this idea of forgiveness. And it's been really cool being able to write something that resonates with people. Take my own family, for instance. They're not going to pick up my book on research and assessment and go, oh, wow, I want to read this book. They don't. But this they'll read.
Well, we sure do appreciate you sharing this with us. And do you have any closing thoughts? Wow, that was really, we may have to cut that out. Closing thoughts to share.
No, we got to keep that in. We got to keep that. Closing thoughts.
I'm thinking shopping for the holidays.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go. All right.
Clothing, oh man.
Yeah. I do. I think I can give you one. And I've often thought about this journey of forgiveness is just that, a particular a particular way that we go through our lives trying to heal relationships. And there's this quote by Rabbi Alvin Fine that's just one of my favorites. He writes in a poem called "Life is a Journey." He writes, "From defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage." And I think that's just a great conceptualization of what this forgiveness journey is about for so many people.
Well, it's been great talking to you. And do you have any other projects that are coming up the pike you wanted to talk about?
Wow. So I'm actually been doing this research with forgiveness and with the instrument that I developed that's in the book. So for those of you who are like doing a dissertation and want to study this, use the instrument in the book. It's cool. It's called the Forgiveness Reconciliation Inventory. And I'm using this with African Americans and Black Americans, looking at issues of trauma, forgiveness, and spirituality. So I think in 2020, had so many Black and African American colleagues, friends, peers who are hurting. This has been a tough year. And not to say that other decades have not been tough, but I think, there's been an increased awareness by white Americans, of, racialized oppression, violence, and discrimination. And, I'm hoping that some of the research I'm doing can lend voice to this process of understanding the role of trauma, forgiveness, and reconciliation among Black and African Americans.
It's an important topic to explore for sure.
So, stay tuned. Maybe that's a follow-up.
Hey, we'll just keep having you back over and over on the Chit Chat. I think we can just make that agreement right now.
Would love to. Would love to do that.
Good. Well, we sure do appreciate it. Hope you have a fabulous holiday season. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Balkin.
Hey, thanks for having me. Thanks for promoting the book and taking an interest in it. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're welcome. Well, thanks so much. And thanks to everyone else for watching. You can check us out on YouTube and, of course, Spotify and a bunch of other podcast arenas. So good to see you all. Hope you have a wonderful holiday season and that you stay well. Thanks. Bye.